She thought it was just another freezing night. Until her dog started barking at something buried in the snow. When she looked closer, her heart nearly stopped. 2 FBI agents tied up and barely breathing, their lips blue from poison. No one else was around. No police, no witnesses, just a 9-year-old homeless girl and her loyal German shepherd. She could have run, but when the agent's eyes flickered open and one whispered, "Don't let them finish it," she realized this wasn't a random attack. It was a warning. What she did next didn't just save their lives. It stopped a disaster that could have destroyed an entire town. Stay till the end. This story will leave you breathless. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The night had fallen heavy over the city, smothering the streets in silence. Snowflakes drifted down like tiny ghosts, melting the moment they touched the ground. A faint wind whistled between the narrow alleys, carrying with it the kind of chill that crept through the bones. 9-year-old Lila trudged through the snow, her boots too big, her coat too thin. Each breath she took formed a little cloud in the air. Beside her, Shadow, the only friend she had left in the world, walked alertly, his fur glistening with frost, his nose twitching at every sound. The city never really slept, but this part of town felt abandoned. The flickering streetlights barely reached the brick walls. Lila's stomach growled quietly, but she ignored it. Hunger had become part of her life, just another shadow following her everywhere. She had learned to keep moving, to stay unseen. But that night something stopped her. Shadow froze mid-step, his ears perked, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. Lila looked down at him. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, her voice barely louder than the wind. The dog didn't answer. He just started walking toward a dark corner of the alley, slow and cautious. Lila followed, her heartbeat quickening with every step. Then she saw them. 2 figures slumped against the brick wall, their bodies still, faces pale under the dim glow of a street lamp. Snow had gathered on their jackets, thick navy coats with bold yellow letters across the chest. FBI. Lila's breath hitched. She blinked, thinking maybe it was her imagination, but no. The letters were clear, and the sight made her throat tighten. She dropped to her knees beside them, brushing snow from their faces. They were a man and a woman, both in their 30s. Their lips were cracked, almost bluish. Ropes were tied tight around their chests and legs. For a second, Lila thought they were dead, until she saw a faint movement. The woman's breath formed a weak cloud of frost. "They're alive," Lila whispered, glancing at Shadow. The dog whined softly, circling the bodies, sniffing near their gloves. That's when Lila noticed something else. A dark syringe lay half buried in the snow, the needle broken, a strange oily residue inside. Her heart started to pound faster. She looked around the alley. Nothing but silence. Whoever did this could still be nearby. She felt her pulse in her ears as she pressed her small hand against the woman's shoulder. "Can you hear me?" she asked. No response. Shadow barked suddenly, short, sharp, urgent. The sound echoed through the alley like an alarm. Lila flinched, gripping his collar. "Shh, quiet." But the dog wouldn't stop staring down the length of the alley, teeth bared. Something cold crawled up her spine. The girl didn't know what had happened here or who these people were, but deep down she could feel it. This wasn't an accident. This was something dark, something dangerous. And somehow she and her dog had just stepped right into the middle of it. The cold wind sliced through the alley like a blade. Lila rubbed her hands together, trying to stop them from shaking. She didn't know what to do. She had never seen anything like this before. 2 FBI agents tied up and barely breathing in the middle of nowhere. Her eyes darted between them, then to Shadow, who kept pacing anxiously, growling under his breath as if warning her not to trust the quiet around them. She leaned closer to the woman, whose lips trembled as she struggled to speak. For a moment, nothing came out, just a faint rasp of breath. Then so quietly that Lila almost missed it, she whispered, "Help, please." Lila's eyes widened. "I'm here," she said quickly, glancing around. "I'll help you, just don't move." Her voice quivered, but determination burned in it. The girl's mind raced. She'd seen people collapse on the streets before, but this was different. Her gaze fell to the syringe lying half buried in the snow. She reached out carefully and picked it up by its broken edge, examining the thick, oily liquid still clinging inside. It wasn't like anything she'd seen before. A faint chemical odor rose from it, sharp and bitter. Shadow barked once, startling her. He had found something else, a small, half-burned folder wedged between two trash bins. Lila pulled it free. The cover was singed, the pages inside smudged with soot. She brushed off the ash until she could make out a few words printed on the front. Operation Iron Veil. Classified. Her stomach twisted. She didn't know what it meant, but it sounded serious. Very serious. She opened the folder, flipping through the damaged papers. Most of the words were burned away, but one sentence caught her eye, typed in bold before the fire had eaten the rest. Unauthorized distribution will result in contamination across. The rest was gone. Lila's fingers went numb, not just from the cold. Contamination? She whispered to herself. A weak groan made her look back. The male agent's head had shifted slightly. His breathing was shallow, his pulse faint beneath his collar. Lila knelt beside him, brushing snow from his sleeve. His hand twitched suddenly, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. She gasped, but didn't pull away. His eyes fluttered open for a second, glassy, unfocused. "Don't trust anyone," he muttered, voice hoarse. "They poisoned us." Then his grip loosened, his hand fell limp, and he went still again. Lila froze, heart hammering in her chest. She looked at Shadow, who stood rigid, ears pricked toward the dark end of the alley. In that moment, she realized whoever had done this might still be out there, watching. Lila crouched beside the unconscious agents, her breath visible in the frozen air. The man's warning echoed in her head. "Don't trust anyone." The words clung to her like ice. She looked down at her trembling hands, then at the snow slowly swallowing the alley. If she didn't do something soon, the cold alone would finish what the poison had started. Shadow pressed against her side, his warm body shaking slightly, his eyes fixed on hers, as if asking what they would do next. Lila swallowed hard. "We can't leave them," she whispered. Her voice cracked under the weight of it. "They'll die out here." The streets had never been kind to her. People passed her by every day, never seeing her, never helping. But now she was the only one standing between life and death for these strangers. It was a feeling she hadn't known before, terrifying, yet powerful. She glanced toward the end of the alley, half expecting someone to appear out of the darkness. Nothing. Only the faint howl of wind and the distant hum of the city. Time was slipping away. "Okay," she murmured to herself, wiping her nose with her sleeve. "Think, Lila, think." She scanned the area, searching for anything she could use. Behind a stack of broken crates, she spotted a piece of plastic tarp and some old cardboard. It wasn't much, but it might block the wind. She dragged them over, her small frame struggling against the weight of the frozen materials. Shadow helped too, tugging at a corner with his teeth, pulling it toward the agents. Lila smiled weakly. "Good boy," she whispered. Together they worked in silence, creating a crude barrier against the cold. She tucked the tarp around the agents, making sure their faces were clear. Her hands were numb by the time she finished. She looked at them, still motionless but alive. For now. Then came the next problem. What if the people who did this came back? Lila's stomach twisted at the thought. She needed to move them, but where? The streets were full of danger, and the police might not believe a homeless girl's story. She looked toward the warehouse at the end of the alley. Its windows were shattered, its door half hanging open. She'd slept there before, it was cold but hidden. Maybe it could buy them time. Lila met Shadow's gaze and nodded. "We're taking them there," she whispered, voice steady now. "No one else is coming. It's up to us." Shadow barked once in quiet agreement, and together they began the impossible task. Two small souls fighting against the cold, carrying hope through the snow. The warehouse loomed ahead like a shadowy giant, its rusted doors half open, snow drifting inside through broken glass panels. Lila's breath came in ragged bursts as she struggled to drag the agents through the snow one at a time. Her boots slipped, her fingers numb, but she refused to stop. Shadow moved beside her, circling constantly, scanning the darkness as if he sensed something she couldn't see. The first agent, a woman, was lighter, and Lila managed to pull her across the icy ground using a torn piece of tarp. But by the time she reached the warehouse steps, her body trembled with exhaustion. She leaned against the cold brick wall, panting. "We'll be safe here," she whispered, as if saying it out loud might make it true. Shadow didn't seem convinced. His ears twitched and he growled low, staring back toward the alley they had just come from. Lila followed his gaze, but there was nothing, only a blur of white and the faint whistle of the wind. "Hey," she said softly, stroking his head. It's okay. No one followed us, but Shadow didn't relax. His fur stood on end, his nose working furiously. Then suddenly he barked, a deep warning sound that echoed through the hollow warehouse. Lila flinched, glancing over her shoulder. The sound of the bark bounced off the concrete walls, making the silence that followed feel heavier, sharper. "Shadow, stop," she whispered urgently. "You'll wake them." A noise cut her off. A metallic clang from outside. Lila froze, her pulse pounding in her ears. Shadow turned sharply, muscles tensing. Someone or something was out there. She crawled to the doorway and peered through the snow. The alley lay still, but her instincts screamed danger. Another sound. This time a soft crunch of footsteps. Not close, but near enough. Shadow growled again, low and guttural. Lila's breath quickened. Whoever had done this to the agents might have realized their plan wasn't finished and come back to make sure no one found them alive. She backed away from the doorway, pressing her back against the wall. "We can't be seen," she whispered. "Not now." Shadow stood at the entrance like a soldier, eyes locked on the dark. The loyalty in his stance was unshakable, protective, fearless. Lila gathered her courage, pulling the metal door shut as quietly as she could. The sound of the latch falling into place echoed faintly. Then everything was silent again, except for the faint growl of the German shepherd, standing guard in the cold, ready to defend the only family he had. The warehouse was dim and cold, its silence broken only by the faint moans of wind seeping through cracks in the metal walls. Lila crouched near the two unconscious agents, wrapping their coats tighter around them. Their skin was pale, breath shallow, but still there. She exhaled shakily, a small cloud of white forming in the air. "You're safe now," she whispered, though even she didn't fully believe it. Shadow prowled the room, his nails clicking softly against the concrete. His nose moved from crate to crate, from corner to corner, restless and alert. Lila watched him for a moment, her brow furrowed. "What is it, boy?" she asked softly. But Shadow didn't respond. He just kept sniffing the ground near the agents, tail rigid, ears flicking. He stopped suddenly at the man's boot, letting out a low, uneasy growl. Then he pawed at it. Once, twice again, claws scraping against the leather. "Hey," Lila whispered, crawling closer. "What are you doing?" Shadow barked once, sharp and insistent. Then Lila saw it, a faint red light blinking beneath the heel of the man's boot. Her eyes widened. What is that?" She leaned closer, brushing away the snow and dirt. It was a small metal device, no bigger than a coin, wedged deep into the seam of the sole. The blinking was rhythmic, steady, pulsing. She didn't know much about technology, but she'd seen enough spy movies on store screens to recognize what this might be. "It's a tracker," she whispered, the word barely escaping her lips. Her pulse quickened. "They're being tracked." She looked toward the door. The realization struck like lightning. If someone planted this, they might already know the agents were alive. They could be coming. Right now, Shadow barked again, more urgent this time. Lila hesitated for only a second, then reached down and tugged at the device. It didn't budge. She bit her lip, bracing herself, then pulled harder until it snapped free with a metallic click. The red light flickered rapidly before going dark. She stared at it, heart racing. The tiny screen still emitted a faint hum. She didn't know if that meant it was off or still transmitting. She couldn't risk it. "Come on," she muttered to Shadow, clutching the tracker in her gloved hand. She hurried to a broken window and looked out. The snow outside glowed faintly under the moonlight, endless and empty. Without thinking, she hurled the device as far as she could into the night. It vanished into the white. Shadow watched it disappear, then turned his attention back toward the alley, his hackles still raised. Lila returned to the agents, pressing a trembling hand to her chest. "They'll be okay," she whispered again, half to them, half to herself. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had just changed. Somewhere out there, someone had felt the signal vanish, someone dangerous, and now they were coming. The wind howled outside like a living thing, rattling the warehouse doors. Lila huddled close to the two agents, her hands pressed against their coats. Their skin felt colder now, their breathing faint and shallow. The color had almost drained from their faces. Fear gripped her chest like a fist. She'd seen people freeze before, people who didn't make it through the night. "We can't stay here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They need warmth. Something." Shadow barked softly, circling her, his breath steaming in the frigid air. He nudged her elbow and then looked toward the far corner of the warehouse where a pile of old wooden crates lay stacked. Lila followed his gaze. "Fire," she murmured. "You're right." She scrambled across the floor, prying loose planks of wood with her bare hands. Her fingers burned from the cold, but she didn't stop. She gathered scraps of paper and cardboard, anything that might catch a flame. The small matches she kept in her pocket, her survival treasure, were nearly gone. She struck one, the spark lighting her face in a warm orange glow. For a moment she hesitated. If someone was out there searching, the light might give them away. But if she did nothing, these people would die before dawn. Her decision came with a trembling breath. She cupped her hands around the tiny flame and fed it to the pile of wood. The fire flickered weakly, then grew, crackling softly as it cast light across the room. The shadows danced on the walls, and for the first time that night a faint hint of warmth touched her skin. She pulled the agents closer to the fire, positioning them so the heat reached their faces. "Come on," she whispered, rubbing their arms. "Stay with me, please." Shadow lay beside her, his head resting on her lap, his body positioned between her and the door. His ears twitched at every sound outside. Lila knew he was guarding her even when she didn't ask. Minutes passed like hours. The snow continued to fall beyond the cracked windows, the world outside fading into white silence. Lila's eyelids drooped, exhaustion tugging at her, but she forced herself to stay awake. Then, just as her breathing steadied, she heard it, the crunch of footsteps outside, slow and deliberate. Shadow's head snapped up, his growl low and deep. Lila's heart froze. Whoever was out there had found them, and this time she wasn't sure they'd make it out alive. The sound of footsteps faded, replaced by the eerie groan of the wind pushing against the warehouse walls. Lila sat frozen beside the flickering fire, her fingers clutching Shadow's fur. Every nerve in her body screamed for her to stay quiet, to stay still. She listened for movement, for breathing, anything. But after a long, breathless minute, all she could hear was the crackle of the flames and the faint whistle of the cold night. Maybe whoever was outside had moved on, or maybe they were just waiting, watching. She drew her knees to her chest, staring at the two agents lying by the fire. They looked peaceful now, too peaceful. She felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name. Pity, fear, loneliness? Perhaps all three. Shadow shifted beside her, resting his head on her lap. The warmth of his fur grounded her, pulling her back from the edge of panic. She ran her hand over his ears, her eyes glistening. "You're the only one who ever stayed," she whispered. The words stirred memories she had buried deep. A year ago, she'd had a home, a small apartment at the edge of town. Her father was an engineer, always working late but never too busy to smile when she ran into his arms. Her mother sang while making dinner, humming soft melodies that made the world feel safe. Then came the explosion. It happened at a government research site not far from their home. The news said it was a chemical accident, but Lila remembered the night vividly. The sirens, the flames lighting up the sky, the men in black suits escorting her away before she could even say goodbye. They told her parents were gone. No explanation, no closure, just gone. Lila swallowed hard, her gaze unfocused as the memory replayed like an old film reel. She remembered finding one of her father's notebooks months later, stuffed behind a radiator in their abandoned apartment. Inside were strange sketches, blueprints, chemical symbols, and a name written over and over again, Iron Veil, the same word she had seen on that burned folder. A shiver ran through her, this one not from the cold. Could it be connected? Could her father's work have led to what was happening now? She stared at the agents again, at the FBI badges glinting faintly in the firelight. "Did you know my dad?" She whispered to the unconscious man, her voice trembling. "Is that why you're here?" No answer came, only the soft hiss of the fire. Outside, the wind howled again, but this time it sounded different, almost like a warning. Shadow lifted his head, ears pricking. His low growl returned, deep and cautious. Lila's pulse quickened. The past was catching up to her, woven into the mystery she had stumbled into. And as she realized that, one truth settled heavy in her heart. This wasn't just about saving strangers anymore. It was about uncovering what really happened to her family. The fire had dimmed to a soft orange glow, its light dancing weakly against the warehouse walls. Lila sat cross-legged beside it, exhaustion pulling at her eyelids. Her body ached from the cold, from fear, from carrying two strangers through the snow, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time her eyes closed, she saw flashes of that night. The explosion, the faces of her parents. The word Iron Veil burned into her memory. Shadow stirred suddenly, his nose twitching. He gave a small bark, not of alarm, but of attention. Lila blinked and followed his gaze. The female agent's hand had moved just slightly, but enough to make Lila's heart leap. She crawled closer. "Hey," she whispered gently. "Can you hear me?" The woman's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. Her lips parted, a dry gasp escaping as she tried to speak. Lila held her trembling hand. "It's okay. You're safe. I found you in the alley. You were... Where are we?" The woman rasped, voice weak but urgent. "In an old warehouse. You were tied up. Poisoned, I think." Lila hesitated, watching the woman's confused expression. "You have to stay still, okay? Help is..." She stopped. Help wasn't coming. No one even knew where they were. The agent tried to sit up but grimaced, clutching her stomach. Her voice came out strained, each word costing effort. We were ambushed. There were 4 of them. Black masks. She coughed, wincing. "Where's Agent Cole?" Lila pointed to the man lying nearby. "He's breathing but not moving." The agent's eyes softened, relief washing over her tired face. Then her expression hardened again. "You need to get out of here, kid," she whispered. "If they find you..." "They won't," Lila interrupted. "I got rid of their tracker." For a second, the woman just stared at her, disbelief flickering in her eyes. "You... what?" "I threw it away. In the snow. They can't find us now." The woman's face went pale. "No," she croaked. "You don't understand. Without that tracker, our backup can't find us." Lila froze. The realization hit her like ice water. She had cut off their only link to help. The agent tried to say more, but her strength failed. She fell back against the wall, breathing shallowly. Lila looked down, guilt flooding through her. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Then from behind her the man groaned. His head turned slightly, eyes flickering open. He looked straight at Lila, his voice a faint whisper carried on a trembling breath. "Stop. The shipment," he said. "They'll destroy. The town." Then his eyes rolled back and the room fell silent again. The echo of the man's words, "They'll destroy the town," hung in the air long after his voice faded. Lila stared at him, her pulse racing, her breath shallow. The firelight flickered across his face, revealing beads of sweat glistening on his skin despite the cold. She didn't understand what he meant, but the fear in his tone had been real. Deadly real. Shadow nudged her leg, sensing her unease. His golden eyes reflected the light as he looked between the 2 agents. Lila's thoughts spun wildly. Who were they? What shipment? And why did it sound like something her father used to warn her about in his old bedtime stories? Stories that never felt like just stories. She leaned closer to the man, her curiosity battling her fear. His gloved hand had fallen limply across his chest, revealing something on his wrist. A strange rectangular tattoo, black lines and numbers etched in a pattern she didn't recognize. It wasn't decorative. It looked like a code, almost like a barcode printed by a machine. "What is that?" she murmured under her breath, brushing away dirt and snow. The numbers shimmered faintly beneath the firelight. Shadow whined softly, sniffing the man's wrist as if trying to understand it too. Lila frowned. She'd seen something like this before once years ago. The image flashed in her mind, her father's old notebook filled with sketches and symbols. One page had the same sequence of rectangular lines printed beside the word BioSeal ID. And beneath it, a handwritten note that read, "If this ever surfaces, run." Her breath caught in her throat. Could her father's work be tied to these people? To whatever Iron Veil was? She looked again at the 2 agents. Their badges, their uniforms, their pale, strained faces. The woman's lips twitched as she mumbled something in her sleep. Lila leaned closer, straining to hear. "Water," the agent whispered faintly. "They have poisoned." Lila froze. The word poisoned echoed in her mind like thunder. She looked toward the half-burned file she had found earlier, lying near the fire. The edges still read Operation Iron Veil. Her hands trembled as she opened it again, trying to piece together the fragments. The few legible words made her stomach twist. Test samples. Municipal water lines. Exposure protocol. Her heart pounded. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about 2 agents. It was about everyone in the town. She turned to Shadow, who was watching her intently. If they're right, she whispered, voice breaking. Everyone's in danger. Shadow let out a low growl as if confirming what she already knew. The girl took a shaky breath, looking back at the agents. Then we're not waiting anymore, she said. We have to find out what they were stopping. The first light of dawn crept through the cracked windows of the warehouse, painting the floor in streaks of pale gold. The snow outside had slowed, leaving the world cloaked in stillness. Lila rubbed her hands together, the fire now reduced to glowing embers. The agents were still unconscious but stable, their breathing shallow yet steady. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to breathe. But Shadow didn't rest. The German shepherd paced near the doorway, nose twitching, tail low. Every few seconds, he'd glance back at her, then toward the outside world, whining softly. What is it? Lila asked, rising to her feet. Do you hear something? Shadow gave a sharp bark and trotted toward the door, stopping just long enough to look over his shoulder. His message was clear. You want me to follow? She murmured, frowning. He barked again, short and insistent. Something in his eyes made her chest tighten, an urgency she couldn't ignore. Lila hesitated, glancing back at the agents. They needed help, but she needed answers too. Whatever Shadow had sensed could be the key to understanding what was happening. Okay, she whispered, grabbing her coat. But just for a minute. The metal door creaked as she pushed it open. The cold morning air rushed in, sharp and biting. Shadow stepped into the snow first, his paws leaving crisp prints behind. Lila followed, hugging herself against the chill. The streets were silent. The only sound was the soft crunch of their footsteps and the distant hum of the waking city. Shadow sniffed the air, head low, body tense. Then suddenly he turned sharply down a side alley and started running. Shadow, wait, Lila called, hurrying after him. He led her through winding back streets, across frozen puddles and under rusted fire escapes. The city here was lifeless, no cars, no voices, just the echo of their movement. Finally, he stopped at the corner of an abandoned lot. A black van sat there, half buried in snow, its engine still faintly warm. Lila's heart skipped a beat. Oh no. She crept closer, Shadow beside her, his fur bristling. The back doors of the van were slightly open. She reached out carefully and pulled one just wide enough to peek inside. Her breath caught. Inside were metal crates stacked tightly together. Each one was stamped with a red warning label that read, Hazardous Material Water Facility Supply. Her stomach twisted. The shipment, she whispered. They weren't smuggling drugs. They were going to poison the town's water. Shadow growled softly, his ears twitching. Lila stepped back, her mind racing. The agents had been trying to stop this. That's why they were attacked. That's why they were poisoned. She looked at Shadow, her small fists clenching. We can't just hide anymore. We have to stop them. The dog barked once, deep, certain, commanding. And as the snow began to fall again, the girl and her loyal companion prepared to face whatever waited in the shadows ahead. Lila's heart hammered as she stared into the van's dark interior. The words water facility supply glared back at her in red, like a warning written in blood. The reality of it hit her. This wasn't about 2 poisoned agents or a secret folder. This was about the entire town. Every home, every person who drank from the same water line was a target. She stepped closer, brushing snow from one of the crates. The metal was cold beneath her fingertips, and when she leaned down, she noticed faint condensation on the latch. It hadn't been sealed long ago. Someone had been here recently, too recently. Shadow sniffed around the van, nose pressed to the snow. Then he froze, head jerking toward a set of footprints leading away from the vehicle. Lila followed his gaze. The tracks were deep and fresh, heading toward the industrial side of town, toward the water treatment plant. Her stomach knotted. That's where they're going next, she whispered. She climbed into the van, searching for any clue. One of the crates was half open, revealing metal canisters filled with a strange blue liquid. Each one had a serial number and a black mark reading, Property of Iron Vale Industries. Her throat went dry. Iron Vale Industries, the same name her father had written in his notes. The same name on the burned file. Her entire body went cold, but not from the snow. She found a clipboard lying on the dashboard, its pages covered in printed orders. The top page read, Delivery Authorization, Iron Vale Containment. Division Destination, Willowbrook Water Facility. Schedule 0400 hours. under supervision of Field Unit 7. The signature at the bottom wasn't legible, but the initials beside it made her heart stop. DH, her father's initials. She stumbled back, gripping the van door for balance. No, she whispered. It can't be. Her father had died years ago. At least that's what they told her. But what if that explosion wasn't an accident? What if he'd been working on this? Shadow nudged her leg, sensing her distress. Lila blinked away tears, forcing her breath steady. He wouldn't do this, she said softly. He was trying to stop it. He must have been. Her mind raced, connecting the pieces, the agents, the poison, the crates. Operation Iron Veil wasn't just a mission name. It was a cover-up. Someone had turned her father's research into a weapon. She closed the van door gently, her reflection trembling in the frosted window. They're going to use it today, she whispered. We have to warn someone before it's too late. Shadow barked, sharp and determined. Lila looked at him, fear and resolve blending in her eyes. Then let's move, she said. If they want to poison the town, they'll have to go through us first. The little girl and her German shepherd disappeared into the storm, leaving behind the van and a secret that could change everything. The wind had grown stronger by the time Lila and Shadow reached the edge of the frozen street. Snow whipped around them, stinging her face and blurring her vision. The sky was a dull gray, heavy with storm clouds, but Lila's thoughts were sharper than ever. Somewhere out there, the people who had poisoned the agents were preparing to unleash something far worse, and no one knew it. She pulled her coat tighter and glanced at Shadow, who trotted beside her with steady focus. We have to tell someone, she said between breaths. But who would believe a girl like me? Her mind raced. The FBI agents had phones, badges, proof, but both were too weak to move. Maybe one of their phones still worked. She turned back toward the warehouse, sprinting through the snow. Inside, the fire had burned out, leaving only a faint orange glow. The agents hadn't moved, but their faces looked less pale now. Lila dropped to her knees beside the man and searched his jacket pockets. Her fingers brushed against cold metal, a phone. She pulled it out, wiping frost from the cracked screen. It still had power. Her heart pounded. She didn't know who to call. 911, the FBI? What if the wrong people answered? Then she remembered the man's words before he passed out. Don't trust anyone. Still, doing nothing wasn't an option. She unlocked the phone. It didn't need a code, only a thumbprint. Carefully, she pressed the agent's hand against the sensor. The screen lit up. Relief flooded her chest. She opened the contacts and found one labeled Command Emergency Line. Her thumb hovered over it. Shadow growled low, as if warning her. I know, she whispered. It could be dangerous, but we have to try. She pressed the call. The phone rang once, twice, then clicked. This is Command, a deep voice answered. Identify yourself, Lila hesitated. My name's Lila. I found 2 of your agents. They're hurt. They said something about a shipment. The town's in danger. There was silence on the other end. Then the voice sharpened. Who are you and how do you have this line? I'm telling the truth, she cried. They were poisoned. I found something about Operation Iron Veil. The line crackled suddenly. A second voice broke in, distorted and cold. Trace initiated. Location locked. Lila's stomach dropped. They're listening, she whispered. Shadow barked loudly, circling her. The call cut off with a sharp click. She looked at the dark screen, panic surging through her veins. Somehow the people behind Iron Veil had hijacked the call. They knew exactly where she was. For a split second, silence filled the room. Then Shadow's ears perked. From outside came the unmistakable roar of an engine. Lila's breath hitched. Headlights sliced through the cracks in the door, flooding the warehouse in white. They found us, she whispered. Shadow growled, teeth bared, ready for whatever came next. The rumble of the approaching engine grew louder, echoing through the frozen stillness. Lila's pulse raced as beams of light sliced across the warehouse walls. She ducked behind a stack of crates, pulling Shadow close. His body was tense, a low growl vibrating in his chest. Through a gap in the wood, she saw the black SUV skid to a stop outside. Its headlights burned through the swirling snow, illuminating the tracks they'd left behind. The doors opened. Heavy boots crunched against the ice. 2 figures stepped out, both dressed in dark tactical gear with black masks that glinted under the headlights. They moved with precision like men trained to kill. Lila's breath caught. She recognized the same insignia she'd seen on the poisoned agents' jackets, but darker. stripped of any badge or honor. Shadow shifted slightly, eyes fixed on the doorway. Lila whispered, "Not yet." "Stay down." The taller man's voice cut through the air. They were here. The tracker signal went dead somewhere in this area. The second one knelt, brushing snow off the ground. "She's not far." "The kid who found them, she's seen too much." Lila's stomach turned. They knew about her. The taller man kicked open the warehouse door, the metallic clang echoing like thunder. The fire's faint glow flickered, casting long shadows on the floor. "Search everything," he barked. "We can't leave witnesses." Lila pressed herself tighter against the crate, her heart pounding so loud she feared they'd hear it. Shadow's fur bristled beneath her fingers. One of the men moved closer to the agents, checking their pulses. "They're alive," he muttered. "Barely. Orders?" The leader's response was cold, mechanical. "Finish it. No loose ends." Lila's breath hitched, horror flashing through her. She couldn't let that happen. Not after everything. Not after what she'd learned. She looked at Shadow, his eyes burning with the same resolve. "We can't hide," she whispered. "We have to protect them." The sound of footsteps approached. One of the masked men stopped just a few feet away from their hiding spot. His flashlight beam swept across the floor, growing closer and closer until it stopped on the crate beside her. Lila clenched her fists. "Now," she mouthed. Shadow leapt from the darkness with a feral snarl, slamming into the man's arm. The flashlight clattered to the ground, beam spinning wildly across the walls. The attacker shouted, stumbling backward as Shadow's teeth tore into his sleeve. Lila didn't think. She grabbed the agent's phone and darted toward the exit. The leader spun, spotting her silhouette in the snow. "There!" he roared. Bullets tore through the air as Lila ran into the storm, Shadow bounding beside her. Behind them, the warehouse exploded into chaos. The town's skyline shimmered in the distance, unaware of the storm about to break over it. And for the first time, Lila realized this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was a race to stop a disaster that could wipe out everyone she'd ever known. Snow whipped against Lila's face as she ran through the storm, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Shadow stayed close at her side, his paws kicking up bursts of white powder. Behind them, shouts echoed through the streets, shadows chasing shadows. The dark figures were closing in, their headlights cutting through the night like hunting blades. Lila turned down a side street, nearly slipping on the ice. Her lungs burned, but she didn't stop. "Come on, Shadow," she gasped. The German Shepherd barked in response, pushing ahead, guiding her toward the flickering lights of the town's old water facility. It loomed like a sleeping monster. Massive metal tanks, frozen pipes, and a chain-link fence lined with frost. The main gate hung open. Fresh tire tracks led inside. Lila's heart sank. They're already here. She ducked behind a control booth, peering through the broken window. A group of men in tactical gear were unloading the same black crates from another van. They moved quickly, prying open lids, attaching long hoses to the canisters of blue liquid. One man barked orders, his voice sharp, controlled. "Pump it into the intake valve. Once it's in the system, no one can stop it." Lila's stomach twisted. This was it, the plan that would destroy everything. Shadow growled low beside her. His fur stood on end, his golden eyes locked on the men. Lila's mind raced. She was just a kid. No weapons, no backup. But if she ran now, the whole town would die. She looked at Shadow. "We have to stop them," she whispered. The dog gave a single bark, low and fierce. Lila crept forward, staying low, moving from one frozen pipe to another. The noise of the wind covered her steps. She spotted a fuse box near the pumping controls, its red indicator light glowing faintly. "If I can cut the power," she thought, "they can't release it." She darted toward it, fumbling for a metal rod half buried in snow. But before she could act, a voice cut through the air. "Well, look who decided to join us," Lila froze. The leader stepped out of the shadows, his black mask glistening with melted snow. He held a gun steady, aimed straight at her. "Brave little girl," he sneered. "But you should have stayed hidden." Shadow's growl deepened, teeth bared. The man smirked. "Step away or the dog dies first." Lila's pulse thundered. "You're poisoning people," she said, her voice shaking but fierce. "My dad tried to stop you, didn't he?" The man tilted his head slightly. "Your father created this formula. We perfected it." Anger flared in her chest. "No, he was trying to destroy it." Before he could answer, Shadow lunged, knocking the gun aside. A shot rang out, echoing across the facility. Lila dove forward, slamming the metal rod into the fuse box. Sparks exploded in a blinding flash, then darkness. The hum of the pumps died. The men shouted in confusion as alarms blared. Lila grabbed Shadow's collar and ran toward the exit, adrenaline surging through her veins. Behind them, the leader roared in rage. "Find them! Don't let them leave alive!" But it was too late. The girl and her dog had already vanished into the storm, carrying the truth, and the only chance the town had left. The first rays of dawn painted the sky in pale orange and silver. The storm had passed, leaving behind a blanket of untouched snow that sparkled like glass. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with every second. Lila sat on the curb outside the water facility, her knees pulled to her chest, her breath fogging the air. Shadow lay beside her, head resting on her lap, his fur damp and flecked with ice. Both were exhausted, but alive. For a long moment she just stared at the horizon, her thoughts heavy and blurred. The chaos of the night replayed in flashes, the fight, the sparks, the explosion of light when the pumps shut down. It didn't feel real. But when she looked at her trembling hands covered in soot and dirt, she knew it was. A convoy of black vehicles screeched to a halt nearby. Armed officers spilled out, followed by medical teams rushing toward the facility. The surviving FBI agents, now conscious after being rescued by responding units, were carried out on stretchers. One of them, the woman Lila had saved, caught sight of her through the crowd. Their eyes met. The agent managed a weak smile and mouthed, "Thank you." Lila's throat tightened. She looked down at Shadow, who wagged his tail faintly as if he understood. "You did good, boy," she whispered, stroking his fur. "You saved them. You saved everyone." Moments later, an FBI officer approached. "You're the one who called in the alert?" he asked, kneeling beside her. His tone was firm, but his eyes softened when he saw how young she was. Lila nodded slowly. "I just found them. I didn't know what else to do." The man studied her for a moment, then offered his coat, draping it over her shoulders. "You did more than most adults could have done," he said quietly. "That facility was about to release a toxin into the town's water system. You and your dog stopped it in time." Lila blinked, the weight of his words sinking in. She glanced at the snowy ground. "I just didn't want anyone else to get hurt," she murmured. Shadow nudged her gently, as if proud. Hours later, as the chaos settled, Lila sat in a heated ambulance wrapped in a blanket. A nurse handed her a steaming cup of cocoa. Across the street, journalists had already gathered, flashing cameras and shouting questions. But Lila didn't look at them. She just stared out the window, lost in thought. A man in a suit approached the vehicle, a senior FBI official. He opened the door and smiled gently. "The agents told us everything," he said. "You risked your life to save theirs. And this town." He paused, glancing at Shadow. "We'd like to make sure neither of you are ever out on the streets again." Lila looked up, unsure what to say. The man continued softly. "You've got a home now. Both of you." Her eyes filled with tears. She turned to Shadow and whispered, "Did you hear that? We did it." The German shepherd leaned closer, resting his head against her shoulder. As the sun rose over the rooftops, its golden light washed over them, a girl and her dog once forgotten by the world. Now it's quiet heroes. And though she didn't know what the future would bring, Lila finally felt something she hadn't felt in years, safe.